Well, Dion manages to sneak Gobi into the hotel, which I certainly hope he does not get in trouble and get caught with. Let's see what happens today. The rest of the day was nice and quiet. Dion fell asleep for a while as well. When he and Gobi both woke up, he balled up some of his socks and tossed them so she would have something to chase and wrestle and bite. He set some food and water out for her, and whenever she started to look anxious, he tucked her back into the bag and took her to the elevator down to the basement parking lot to let her relieve herself. He had planned to just take her to the back corner, well away from any of the cars, but once they were down there, he caught sight of the parking lot exit. Were those bushes by it? He approached carefully with Gobi by his side. They were. The hotel had planted a small patch of bushes right by the exit, probably to match the plants that lined the walk and the front lawn outside. That was a much better place than making her relieve herself on bare concrete or against a wall. Dion gave Gobi a little privacy while she went, but stayed close by. The last thing he needed was someone driving in and spotting her. No one did, and they made it back upstairs without incident. Gobi seemed perfectly happy with this arrangement. She didn't bark once and seemed fine when riding in the bag. After all the stress of losing her and looking for her, it was nice to have a day of peace and quiet with just the two of them. The next morning, though, Dion realized that he had a small problem. He had all the food he had gotten for Gobi the other day, but none for himself, and he was starving. She was still asleep on the bed, snoring and twitching as always. Dion hated to wake her up. Surely he could go downstairs, grab some food, and get back before she woke up. He decided to risk it. Stepping carefully out of the room, he put the Do Not Disturb sign on the handle, then gently closed the door. It took him fewer than 15 minutes to go downstairs, get some food, and come back up. But when he returned, he was surprised to see a housekeeping cart on his floor. Then he saw that the door to his room was open. "Gobi," he shouted, forgetting all about the need to be quiet. The need to find Gobi was a whole lot stronger. Charging into the room, Dion checked the bed first, empty. Then he scanned the rest of the room, also empty. He was about to run down to the lobby when he noticed that the bathroom door was shut. Strange. He was sure he had left that open. Very carefully he opened the door. There, wiping down the bathroom counter, was one of the hotel maids, and sitting in the bathtub watching her was Gobi, who looked very entertained by all of this. Her tail was wagging furiously, and she panted at Dion when she spotted him. But she still didn't bark, nor did she get ready to leave her new perch. Instead, after wiggling her eyebrows at Dion, she hunkered down and went back to watching the maid. Evidently, what she was doing was a whole lot more interesting than even chasing after Dion's socks. Dion tried talking to the maid, but quickly gave up. He had wanted to explain how much trouble he'd be in if anyone found out that he had Gobi up here with him, but she didn't speak any English, and he didn't speak any Chinese. Finally, he pulled out his wallet and handed her a 100 yuan note. It was only $15 back home, but he mimed not to say anything about Gobi. The maid nodded. Whether she actually knew what he'd said or not was a whole nother story. For right now, she wasn't running downstairs to tell the manager that Dion had smuggled a dog into his room. That would have to be enough. Privately, Dion suspected that Gobi would get sick of being stuck in this hotel room for days or even weeks on end, but it did give the two of them a chance to recover a little. He checked out the scar on her head. It looked as if it was finally starting to heal. "What or who did this to you?" Dion asked her, brushing her fur away from the scar a little. Eventually, the maid finished cleaning. "Thank you," Dion said, and meant it. He watched as she collected all of her cleaning gear and headed for the door. It was only after she left that Dion wedged some of the couch cushions against the door to the hall. This way they wouldn't rattle every time the ground shook from the people walking by or the elevator running and alarm Gobi into barking. As long as no one else tried to get into his room, he and Gobi were all set. Dion spent the rest of the morning doing interviews by phone while Gobi slept on the bed. Newspapers and news sites back in Britain and America had been asking him for updates all along. But Dion had found it difficult to talk to them with Gobi missing. What could he say beyond the note of the crowdfunding site? He didn't know any more about how long she'd been missing, or how she had gotten loose, or where she was. Having to talk about that over and over again would have been so depressing. For him, and for all of the people rooting for him and Gobi, Dion hadn't wanted that. But now things were different. Now he and Gobi were together again. Now he could happily tell the whole story about coming back to China, about searching and about finding her. He could relax and smile and talk about how they could now move forward with their plan to bring Gobi back to Scotland with him. Eventually, Gobi woke up. She stretched and yawned and then hopped down out of his lap and padded over to the door. She scratched at the door with one paw, not hard, but more to get Dion's attention. Then she whined. Uh-oh, Dion knew what that meant. She needed to go again. But this wasn't the museum from the storm. There weren't any fake trees right outside the door. Still, he knew she needed to go, and he couldn't make her go in here. That wasn't fair to Gobi or the house cleaners, which meant he had to take her outside the room at least. Dion thought the best bet was to go down to the basement parking lot again. That was still a little gross, but at least it wasn't in the hall or the room or the lobby. It also meant he didn't have to get past the guards again. But he was still worried. What if the cleaning lady had told someone about Gobi being in his room? Stepping over the door, Dion patted Gobi on the head. I know, girl. I know, he said. And then he cracked the door open. Nobody else was out in the hall. Okay, let's go, he told her, and he stepped out. She quickly followed. He had considered hiding her in the bag again, but that had taken a lot of effort the first time. He didn't think it would be worth it for such a quick trip. They trotted over to the elevator and Dion pushed the down button. The whole time they were waiting, he kept glancing around. What would he do if someone else came into the hall? He couldn't hide Gobi then. If the guest was a foreigner like him, they might not mind. In fact, the guest might even know who he was and who Gobi was. But if that guest were Chinese, Dion could be in trouble. There was no way he would be happy about discovering a dog that was sharing their floor. Fortunately, no one else came out. The elevator dinged, and when it finally opened, the car was empty. Dion hurried in with Gobi beside him. He pressed the button for the parking lot, and the door slid shut. No one else got on, and they reached the parking lot without a problem. Not ideal, I know, Dion told Gobi as they walked across it, but I hope it's okay for now. She didn't complain. They headed for the exit and the same patch of bushes as before. Again, Dion turned his back to give Gobi some privacy. He heard the elevator ding and glanced that way. It opened and two men in dark suits came out. Dion worried that they might be headed his way, but instead they turned and got into a gray sedan. Time to go, Gobi, he urged. If the car came this way, the men would see her for sure. Fortunately, when he glanced over his shoulder, Gobi had finished. She kicked some dirt back over what she had left, and then she trotted to his side, her tail wagging. Dion led her away from the exit, but not straight back toward the elevator. Instead, he circled around so that the gray sedan wouldn't see them as they passed. As they were walking, he heard the elevator again. This time only one man exited, but Dion's heart sank. It was a security guard, and the man stationed himself in front of the elevator, arms crossed. Now what were they going to do? Dion had no idea how long the security guard planned to stand there. It could be all day, or he might start walking around the parking lot to make sure the cars were safe and no one had snuck in from outside. Either way, they would get caught. Dion thought about calling Richard for help. Maybe he could come down here and distract the security guard so Dion could sneak Gobi back into the elevator. But there weren't any places to hide here, really. The guard would probably see them, and then all of them would be in trouble. Finally, Dion decided that the best option was the direct one. Come on, Gobi, he said, and he headed straight for the elevator. The security watched him approach. The man straightened and nodded at Dion, but then he spotted Gobi and held up his hand for them to stop. Dion did stop just a few feet from the man, and Gobi stopped by his side as always. We're just headed back to our room, he explained. Dion had no idea if the guard understood him, so he pulled out his room key and held that up. Then he pointed at the elevator. The guard pointed at Gobi and shook his head. That was exactly what Dion had been afraid of. He frowned. What could he do now? Beside him, Gobi cocked her head to one side. It didn't look like she had any answers either. Then Dion remembered the maid. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out another 100 yuan note and held it up, and then he waved it toward the elevator. The guard considered for a moment. Finally he nodded. Dion handed him the money, and the guard stepped aside to let them pass, both of them. Well, that was lucky, Dion said, after the elevator door had closed behind them, and he and Gobi were alone. He was still worried, though. What if the guard told the manager? What if he told someone else? What if the maid told someone? The more people who knew he had Gobi in here, the more likely it was that someone would come to disturb them. Dion hoped that Lu Xun would find a place for them soon. Wow. He's taking such chances of keeping Gobi inside this hotel. I sure hope that Lu Xun finds some place for them to stay as well. We'll have to see tomorrow. Have a great day.